Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be breaking down my week number 13 wide receiver start or sit decisions for the 2024 fantasy football season, going in depth through every single game from all the games on Thanksgiving through Black Friday, all the way through Sunday and Monday Night Football. But before we could get into things, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you do leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter or X, please do so at NotoriousFNTSY. So without further ado, let's get into my week number 13 wide receiver start or sit decisions for the 2024 fantasy football season. We begin with the first game on Thanksgiving at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that is the Chicago Bears at the Detroit Lions. Now, with the Bears getting rid of Shane Waldron, magically the Bears offense has started clicking. Back-to-back games with DJ Moore having 7 receptions on 7 targets. Last week up against the Vikings, he had 106 yards and a touchdown, as well as 1 carry for 13 yards. Now, the Lions defense allows the 5th highest amount of points on a per-game basis to the wide receiver position, and with the Bears needing to chase in this game from behind, DJ Moore will get a ton of opportunities to have a great game. I can't truly crown DJ Moore just yet because he could definitely get out-targeted by any of Rome Odunze or Keenan Allen on this team, but Moore to me feels like a great high-end wide receiver 3. If he's your flex, you're definitely feeling mighty fine about that. For Keenan Allen, this dude sucks in targets with the efficiency that Tony Soprano scarfs down deli meats on the kitchen counter. He was the wide receiver 5 last week with 9 receptions on 15 targets for 86 yards and a touchdown. Now, the targets don't always lead for efficiency, but with Caleb Williams and the offense looking on the up and up, and just like I said with Moore, the team seemingly playing from behind, having to throw the ball a ton, airing the rock out a ton late on in the game, Allen should be able to get enough targets to be a fringe high-end wide receiver 4, low-end wide receiver 3 type of deal here. For Rome Odunze, he is kind of the odd man out in this scenario. For the Bears, kind of chilling on the cuck chair right now. Could Odunze outscore both Keenan Allen and DJ Moore? 100%. He has had 10 targets in back-to-back games, and maybe this is the week where he is the best game of his young career. But ultimately, I just don't trust him as much as I trust the unks in DJ Moore and Keenan Allen. So Rome Odunze is going to be a sit. He is close to being a start, though, and if you wanted to make an argument to start him over some of the lower-end starts, then in a lot of those scenarios, I wouldn't be like, wow, that's a really bad opinion that you have there. So for the Lions, Jalen Johnson for the Bears is going to attempt to lock up Amon-Ra St. Brown. And honestly, with how great Johnson has looked this season, it is possible that it happened. Now, Amon-Ra St. Brown lost his touchdown streak of 1 or more touchdowns in 8 straight games last week. Now, even with this being not the best spot, in my opinion, up against Johnson, there is 0 reason for me to really worry, to panic about Amon-Ra St. Brown. He is a top 8 wide receiver in my rankings weekly, and he will stay there this week. For Jameson Williams, ever since returning from suspension, J-Mo has seen 5 or more targets in all 3 games. While the actual finish on a per-game basis does fluctuate a ton for J-Mo, with how great the Lions offense is and how fast Jameson Williams himself is, he will always be a high-end wide receiver 3/flex start for me, just like he is on the week. Now, Tim Patrick went 4 for 4 last week, like he was at Wendy's for 55 yards, which is cool and all up against the Colts and Indy. But this man hasn't scored more than 10 points a single time this season. I don't expect him to snap that streak this week, so he definitely should be benched and should not even be rostered. Next up, we move to the New York Football Giants at the Dallas Cowboys, Thanksgiving, 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, Malik Nabers was on tilt after his wide receiver 25 performance up against the Bucs last week. He basically grabbed Brian Daboll's big ass, who I guess technically he isn't as big anymore. Ever since he got on Ozempic, he kind of lost all of his aura. His coaching hasn't been as well, but Malik Nabers managed to pick him up and just heave him underneath the bus, and he basically just said that the offensive play calling is bad, right? He had 6 catches on 9 targets for 64 yards. on paper, this is a good matchup, but the Cowboys defense has played a lot stronger as of recently, and the quarterback position in New York for the Giants is as suspect as it gets. Hopefully, Drew Lock can play and get the start, but you can never guarantee that Drew Lock actually plays well. And you also can't even guarantee that he plays because as of right now, Tommy DeVito, Tommy Cutlass, the Italian Stallion, is listed as a game-time decision. Now, I love Malik Neighbors, and I think he is one of the best wide receivers in the game already as a rookie, but I just don't have the ability. I don't have the cojones. I don't have the balls to rank him inside the top 12. He is a high-end wide receiver 2 for me, strictly because I think he gets fed. He gets peppered a gazillion targets here in Jerry's world. Now, Wan'Dale Robinson is going to probably put up his usual close to 10 points, right? He did it last week, and while that has some value, with his upside being severely limited by him just really being a target hog who doesn't do too much after the catch, with no teams on bye this week, I would definitely leave him on the pine. Now, Darius Slayton has more upside than a guy like Wan'Dale, but he doesn't have the safety blanket of targets that Robinson possesses, with just 2 targets last week, and the targets potentially being shakier than some ass at the club when Snap Your Fingers by Lil Jon comes on. I definitely do not believe you should be starting Darius Slayton, even in a solid spot here up against the Cowboys. For the Cowboys, CeeDee Lamb is dealing with a back injury, which I just believe is probably from carrying this whole entire fucking offense back-to-back games as the wide receiver 15, and I haven't seen anything that tells me he's going to miss, so I'm just going to operate under the assumption that he's good to go in this game. Against the Commanders, he was 10 of 12 for 67 yards, with Cooper Rush playing better. I believe that CeeDee Lamb will be able to crack the top 12 as a low-end wide receiver 1. Jalen Tolbert is a 4 to 5 target per week guy on this offense. But, and this is a big but, shout out to Lisa Ann, they might end up using their other wide receiver, Brandon Cooks, in this game. It's not a guarantee that he plays just yet, but Brandon Cooks coming back really would throw a wrench into things here, and honestly, I think Jalen Tolbert is just too cute of a play for me to start. Now, Turpin, the fact that Brandon Cooks is coming back, potentially could really hurt him as well, and Turpin had that sick kick return touchdown out of like a video game, both him being a 2 to 3 target per week kind of a guy. You will not be playing him. Next up, we got the Miami Dolphins. The Miami Dolphins, number 1 at the Green Bay Packers. Thanksgiving, 8:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and this game has me feeling real nicey. Now, early on in the week, I was pessimistic about the Dolphins, and I'm a Dolphins fan. I love the Miami Dolphins. I've been a fan of them ever since I was a kid. I've watched our team get butt-fucked year in and year out, but ultimately, something has me feeling like we're going to win this game. Now, probably, they will lose on a heartbreak field goal, and honestly, Tua's record in the cold and up against teams above 500 isn't very good, so this could easily be a shellacking by the Packers, but I do think the Dolphins will at least keep it competitive. Now, Tyreek Hill, kind of like Malik Neighbors, just seems mad about his usage as of recently, but he doesn't seem as mad as Neighbors, who basically just stabbed Brian Daboll in his bald head in the postgame, right? Last week, we ended up seeing Tyreek Hill take to Twitter, sharing a meme that implies that he wants more targets. Now, last week, he had 6 targets on 5 receptions for 48 yards. While this season has been one to forget for Tyreek Hill, his upside is too high to rank him lower than a high-end wide receiver 2, which is where I got him, and I'm hoping this is the week where he pops off and he finishes as a top 5 receiver. Now, while Tyreek Hill has been on the struggle bus, Jalen waddled away, waddle, till the very next day, had the Patriots defense lost like a show with a shitty ending. 8 receptions on 9 targets for 144 yards and a touchdown. His best game on the season by far, and his second game on the season with a touchdown. More than likely, he does end up plummeting back down to earth here as like the wide receiver 42 or something, but due to what happened last week and due to Waddle really having a whole lot of upside, I kind of just feel like he's a mid to low end wide receiver 3/a flex type of a play. For Odell Beckham Jr., he's going to get anywhere from 2 to 4 targets on a game-by-game basis. He has looked solid, making some clutch catches for the Dolphins, but even with Tua Tagovailoa back, there's kind of just too many cooks in the kitchen here to make any argument to play Odell. They've got Janu, they've got Reek, they've got Waddle, they've got Achane, and all of those guys will probably end up out-targeting him. So there's no need to roster Odell in the year 2024. For the Packers, we are going to be firing up Jayden Reed, but what you need to fire up is Underdog, the sponsor of today's video. And on Thanksgiving, you can get your free pick, which is Jordan Love, higher than half a total yard, plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash. So if you're brand new to Underdog, you take Jordan Love, you match him with any of the other players playing on Thanksgiving, other than anyone on the Green Bay Packers or anyone playing on Sunday or the Monday games. And if both of your picks hit, you will get 3 times what you put in your pick 'em. If you put in multiple other picks, then they all have to hit, but the payout will be higher. So make sure you sign up using promo code Notorious right now, or by clicking on the link in the description to get your free pick, plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash. And if you're watching this after Thursday, the game has already been played. And guess what? If you sign up using promo code Notorious, you'll just receive a different, either an NBA player higher than half a total point or an NFL player higher than half of a total yard. So back on into things here. For the Green Bay Packers, Jaden Riley Reed has been so underwhelming as of recently. Over the last 2 weeks, he's had fewer than 10 PPR points. So up against the Dolphins, I think a lot of people are just going to give up on him, right? They're going to say, you know what? I'm done with Jayden Reed. And what that will probably lead to is him dropping his nuts into the mouth of the defense and popping off. His targets have dipped quicker than an Irish goodbye, but ultimately, with just 3-2 over the last 2 weeks, I just don't feel confident enough to rank him inside the top 24. But without Doubs, that could end up bringing Reed back to his normal 5 or 6-ish targets. So I got him as a high-end wide receiver 3. Now, with Doubs dealing with the concussion on a short week, he is not playing. That elevates Watson up to more than likely being the wide receiver 2, but I say more than likely because it wouldn't really surprise me if Wicks or Bo Melton out-targeted him. Watson has been a guy that has top 12 upside in any given matchup, and we've seen that even back in the days playing with old man Aaron Rodgers, but with the Finns defense playing better as of recently, I just can't rank Watson as a start. But if your wide receiver core is down bad, I don't necessarily hate playing him. Now, Dontavian John Wicks hasn't had over 3 targets since week 7. This week, he should be able to get more targets, right, because of no Dobbs. But even without Dobbs, I would lean more on the Watson train over the Wicks train. Next up, we move to Black Friday, the Las Vegas Raiders at the Kansas City Chiefs, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, it seems as though Aiden O'Connell is going to suit up on Friday as the Raiders quarterback 1. Gardner Minshew is out for the season with the collarbone. Now, for some reason, maybe they pull a switcheroo, a parent trap right before the game, and they're like, oh man, Desmond Ritter's gonna play, then you should be running at the speed of Mr. Incredible's son, right? Over the last 4 games, Jacoby has had 3 games inside the top 20, and he was the wide receiver 7 last week in a tough spot up against the Broncos, going 10 of 15 for 120 yards. With the quarterback change, I honestly think the safety kind of goes out the window. So I have Jacoby as a lower-end wide receiver 3. Trey Tucker, I barely knew her, had 7 receptions on 8 targets last week for 82 yards. But there is a higher chance that it rains spaghetti and meatballs tomorrow over that happening again. DJ Turner's another guy that, just like Tucker, could magically have a good game, but with Aiden O'Connell under center, I just don't really think you would want to start him. For the Kansas City Chiefs, DeAndre Hopkins was the wide receiver 18 last week up against the Panthers. 5 receptions on 6 targets for 35 yards and a score. Now, he hasn't really performed all that well as a Kansas City Chief. There's always that ability that DeAndre Hopkins just lays the pipe down like he's an Italian plumber named Mario here, but I just am not as excited as I would be if the guy was able to get like 8+ targets a game, where he is at right now with no teams on bye. To me, he's more of a lower-end wide receiver 3 type of guy, but a guy you'd be fine definitely throwing in your flex, especially up against the Raiders. Now, Xavier Worthy, he's another one of these guys that is, you know, the poster boy of has the crazy upside, right? He could get 2 targets, take that for 100 yards and a touchdown. But even with 6 targets last week, he was the wide receiver 42. Even in a solid spot here, you're just looking at a glass cannon high upside shot. So for me, he's going to be a sit. Ever since returning from injury, Mr. Corvette, Juju Smith-Schuster has just 3 total targets in 2 games. With DeAndre Hopkins in town, Juju belongs on waivers. Next up, we got the Los Angeles Superchargers at the Atlanta Falcons Sunday, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, Ladd McConkey was the wide receiver 20 last week and has now been a top 20 wide receiver in back-to-back games. Up against the Ravens on Monday Night Football, he was 6 of 6 for 83 yards. Now, if Herbert would have fed him down the stretch of the game instead of no hands Quentin Johnston, maybe they would have actually scored a touchdown. But hey, what do I know? Ladd came into the game banged up with a shoulder injury, so now another week healthier, and with the Falcons just getting mercy ruled by the Denver Broncos prior to the bye, Ladd to me feels like a solid mid-range wide receiver too. For Quentin Johnston, he left his hands at home or something because this motherfucker had 0 catches on 5 targets. We always knew Quentin Johnston was like this, but he kind of masked it as of recently, but he ripped the fucking mask off and like that Future song and is back on his old bullshit. So I think he could bounce back, but honestly, we're to teach him a lesson by benching him. Joshua Palmer had 8 targets last week with 3 receptions for 38 yards. It felt like there was like 200 penalty yards granted against him, though, because Justin Herbert kept just throwing a heat-seeking missile to him deep down the field, but you don't get any points for that. He should be back down to being like a 2 to 4 target per game type of a guy. He has just 1 game inside the top 30 this year, so he should definitely be on your waivers. For the Atlanta Falcons, Drizzy Drake London was a victim of the Falcons' offense's ineptitude prior to the bye in Week 11 in a game where the Broncos ended up face-fucking the Falcons like their name was Ash Cash. London was the wide receiver 47 with 3 receptions on 7 targets for 61 yards up against a middle-of-the-road Chargers defense in terms of points allowed on a per-game basis. I feel like a bounce back is coming for Coles Cash Kirk and this Falcons offense as London finishes as a low-end wide receiver 1. Darnell, here comes the Mooney, was also a victim of the Broncos using the Falcons like a puppet and fisting them, while also being a victim of the injury bug with a hamstring injury. Now, it is not considered to be serious, so I wouldn't panic since prior to last week, he had 3 straight games inside the top 19, but ultimately we need to be smart and not rank him too highly since the injury could hamper him. Right now, I got him as a high-end wide receiver 3. Now, if Darnell Mooney was to magically miss, which I don't believe will be the case, Ray McLeod could be a startable wide receiver 3/flex, but in the scenario where Mooney is back, McLeod, he's another one of these guys. Like, you close your eyes and the game finishes, and McLeod had like this crazy 50-yard touchdown and scored 12 points, right? It wouldn't be that surprising, but I still would not start him. Next up, we move to game number 6, the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, George Pickens struggled in the snow like my Honda Civic. Last week up against the Browns in Cleveland, 4 receptions on 7 targets for 48 yards as the wide receiver 45. Now, he should have scored a touchdown, but he just didn't end up seeing the ball because of the snow. Up against the Bengals defense that can't stop fucking Air Bud, GP should be able to be a higher end wide receiver 2 based on how he's performed so far with Mr. Unlimited. Now, Calvin Austin was seen clearly last week in the Snow Bowl, unlike Mr. Pickens as the wide receiver 14, with 3 receptions on 3 targets for 78 yards and a tug. Calvin has the need for speed, and again, he's another one of these guys like, oh, magically he'll have a big game every once in a while, but I don't think it's going to end up happening on his 3 or 4 targets, so up against the Bengals, even in a great spot here, I would be sitting him. For Mike Williams, he did score a touchdown in his Steelers debut, and that was cool for Magic Mike, but ever since then, he hasn't caught a single pass. With his snaps floating around the 30% number, you just can't uncork him yet. For the Cincinnati Bengals, Jamar Chase has been dominant like Larry Bird back in 85 over the last 2 weeks prior to the bye. 11 or more targets in 4 straight games, and in 3 of the last 4, he's been a top 9 wide receiver. Last game out in LA against the Superchargers, he had 7 catches on 13 targets for 75 yards and 2 touchdowns as the wide receiver 4. The Steelers defense is great, so I won't act like this is a clear smash spot, But, and this is a big but, shout out to Abella Danger, when a guy is playing as great as Jamar Chase, even in a far from ideal spot, I gotta rank him as a top 5 wide receiver. Tee Higgins returned from his 3-game absence with an injury as the wide receiver 2 in that game. 9 receptions on 13 targets for 148 yards and a touchdown. Higgins just feels like a clear middle-of-the-road wide receiver 2 every single week, and with the Bengals defense sucking hog, Joe Burrow will have to throw a bunch down the stretch, leading to a top 20-ish game here. Andre Yoshi-Vaz has completely fallen off of a cliff with Higgins back, and honestly, even without Higgins, he really didn't do much, so he should not be rostered. Next up, we move to the Arizona Cardinals at the cold-like Minnesota Vikings. Now, for the Cardinals, I say this every single week, but the Cardinals are bipolar offensively. Even with their defense showing up, the offense was limp dick in need of Viagra. Marv was 3 of 6 for 47 yards, and the Vikings defense is good, but if you actually look into things, they allow the second highest amount of points on a per-game basis to the wide receiver position. So Marv could get his toes wet here and have a big game, but I just don't trust him at all. So he's in the mid to high-end wide receiver 3 range. Michael Wilson hasn't scored more than 10 points since week 8, and with the Cardinals offense again being so hit or miss, I guess they never miss, huh? I want nothing to do with Mike Wilson or the short king, Greg Dortch. For the Vikings, last week for Justin Jefferson, the Bears' game plan was clearly to just put a strap on Justin Jefferson, lock him up, and let everyone else do what they wanted to do. And technically it worked, right? They stopped Justin Jefferson. He scored 4.7 PPR points. But everyone else went ballistic, right? Jefferson was the wide receiver 65, 2 catches, 5 targets for 27 yards, while Jefferson has been on a downward slope as of recently. Up against the Cardinals, I believe Jefferson gets back to his old ways as a top 5 wide receiver. Jordan Addison Ray with Justin Jefferson in his shackles. He was the wide receiver 1, 8 of 9 for 162 yards and a tug. Back-to-back games with 8 or more targets and a touchdown in both. Up against the Cardinals, Addison is a low-end wide receiver 3. Jalen Naylor, I barely knew her. Got the party started last week. He also found the end zone. He was, he was a part of the fun. But he only had 1 catch for 5 yards, so you don't want to be trusting that or playing that. Next up, we got the Colts at the Patriots, and I'll keep it simple, stupid. Don't start any of these motherfuckers. Michael Pittman, if you have to play any player on the Colts this week, it would be him, but more than likely, he's going to be seeing Christian Gonzalez on him for most of the snaps, and that could lead to a real bad performance out of Michael Pittman Jr. Since Downs is not going to be playing, the upside is there for Pittman, as he was the wide receiver 16 last week up against the Lions, but this is a spot where people are going to falsely kind of bang the drum for Pittman, falsely believe in him, and then magically Alec Pierce will score like 30 fantasy points. So while I don't think that Pittman is like this putrid start, like I can't even believe you have to start Pittman, I just can't give my vote of confidence for him because he's going up against Gonzalez. Now, every few weeks, Anthony Richardson does his famous fuck it, Alec Pierce out there somewhere, where he heaves the ball 40 yards and Pierce just runs directly into the end zone. While that could happen here, no need to risk it for the biscuit. I love Adonai Mitchell and think the talent is there, but even without Josh Downs, I just don't trust him yet, especially with Anthony Richardson. Now, if you are down bad and need like 10 fantasy points, I think Jamario Douglas might be the guy for that, but with his ceiling being like 14 points, I would rather just leave him on the bench. Kayshon Boutte has been racking up a solid target share with 6 targets in 4 of his last 5, but he hasn't done anything yet that would indicate me actually playing him over Douglas. Outside of 1 game where Bourne scored a touchdown, he hasn't done anything this season, so he should be on the waivers. Next up, we got the Seattle Seahawks at the New York Jumbo Jets. Now, JSN has been hotter than Adriana in The Sopranos over the last 3 weeks, especially when she's on the tennis court. If you know, you know. 3 straight inside of the top 13. Wide receiver 13 last week with 6 receptions on 7 targets for 77 yards and a touchdown. We just saw the Jets get spit roasted prior to the bye by the Colts, and I expect JSN to have yet another great game as a high-end wide receiver too. Now, Metcalf is, in my opinion, a start, but he's about as safe as licking an open wound on Magic Johnson's body, but the upside is always there. Ever since returning from injury, he was the wide receiver 28 in San Francisco. I was about to say in 49ers, that would make sense. And wide receiver 35 up against the Cardinals. to me, it feels like JSN is just the number one guy now on the team. But with Metcalf's upside to pop off for 30-plus points in any given game, he'll be ranked as a low-end wide receiver too, but he did miss practice day again. It was Wednesday, so I wouldn't panic too hard, but it is something to note, throw a pin in that. Tyler Lockett in my pocket skirt with JSN on a warpath like his name was Genghis Khan. Lockett has just 3 targets in back-to-back games. Lockett at this point in his career would really need like 6 to 8 touches to actually do anything since he just flops like a fish the second he catches the ball. So I would not be willing to play Lockett in this spot. For the Jets, Garrett Wilson shriveled up like your balls when you end up getting into a cold tub over the last 2 weeks. Now, I worry that Aaron Rodgers looking geriatric again, and that's going to end up leading to GW going down, down, down. I'm yelling timber. Now, he will still be able to see a boatload of targets, 8 or more in 9 of the last 11 games. While I can't tell you playing him is the safest move up against the Seahawks, I think he should be able to squeak his way into being like a low-end wide receiver 2, like wide receiver 20 through 24 type of range. Now, since becoming a Jet, Adams has been the wide receiver 51, 47, 7, 36, and 32. Coming out the bye week, we know that Wilson and Adams are both going to get fed like your chubby cousin at Thanksgiving. But I just can't really throw too much trust on either of these guys. If I was to blindly trust one over the other, it would be Garrett Wilson over Devontae Adams. But they're both in that low-end wide receiver 2 range. Gibson would be lucky to see a target for the Jets, so he's a clear sit. Next up, we move to the Tennessee Titans at the left. Hands up. Who are we? The Commanders. Now, I'm going to be 100% honest when it comes to Calvin Ridley. I believed that the second that Will Levis, the mailman, returned, that Calvin Ridley was finished. And I was wrong. Ridley has been a top 24 receiver in 2 of the last 3 games with Will Levis, and up against a not-so-hot Commanders defense. I think Ridley should be able to finish as a middle-of-the-road wide receiver 2 in that wide receiver 18 to 20-ish type of range. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine is so on fire that I am afraid that he might actually burn 6 touchdowns over the last 7 games. Now, this hasn't actually meant that he's been a solid fantasy start because he's finished inside the top 24 just 3 times in that stretch. But if you're down bad with your flex or you're in a deeper league, there's a fine argument to be made for Nick Westbrook-Ikhine to start, right? You can start him. I'm not saying, oh my God, he's this awful start. But again, he needs a touchdown in order for him to have any value. Tyler, yeah, Boyd, had his best game of the year last week up against the Texans with 11.5 PPR points, with him scoring fewer than 8 points in every single game besides 2. Regardless of the matchup, no one should be starting him. Terry McLaurin has been a top 21 wide receiver in 6 of the last 7 games. The only game in which he failed to do so was up against the Eagles, where we saw Quinyon Mitchell absolutely he basically had Terry was holding his pocket, right? In a stretch of 7 games, he was a top 8 wide receiver twice, though. So while I'm not going to pretend like the Titans are this amazing matchup, red panty night, like, wow, I'm so excited to start Terry McLaurin up against the Titans, I do think he's definitely close to being a top 10 option. And I got him as a low-end wide receiver 1 to a high-end wide receiver 2. For Noah Brown, he ripped off his second-best game of the season last week up against Dallas as the wide receiver 23. 6 receptions on 10 targets for 71 yards. Brown, to me, has really become the clear number 2 behind Terry on this team. I think in deeper leagues, just like Westbrook, you could end up playing him, but in your average league with no teams on bye, he's going to be a bench. Now, Zacchaeus, Luke McCaffrey, Diami Brown are all kind of the wide receiver 3A, 3B, and 3C in this offense. Neither one of them will end up being clearly the wide receiver 3, which makes none of them startable. Next up, we got game number 11. If you guys have enjoyed thus far, hit that subscribe button down below like it owes you some money. Leave a like on today's video. It would help you out a ton. It would help you out. It would help me out a ton. It'll help you too. Very nice. Hit that like button. So Nico Collins' return game was a nightmare. In week 11, prime time up against Dallas, his big touchdown was called back. But in week 12, even despite the Texans getting fucking cream pied by Will Levis and friends. Nico was the wide receiver 10 with 5 receptions on 9 targets for 92 yards and a touchdown. I have been the founder of the Nico Collins fan club for years at this point, and now with him back from injury and playing 79% of the snaps, with the snaps likely to increase as well, I feel incredibly confident ranking Nico as a top 5 wide receiver, facing one of the best matchups in fantasy for wide receivers in terms of points per game. Now, Dell is close to being in the start-worthy range. If you wanted to argue for him over some of the fringe guys, I wouldn't say that's all that crazy, because this is a really great spot for him, right? Because going up against the Jaguars, this is the type of matchup where you get a new fucking contract because you play so well, right? But Dell has kind of just lost a step this season. And even with Collins making the coverage softer, Dell really hasn't taken advantage of that yet. The upside is there, but with him having just more than 10 points in only 5 of 11 games this year, ultimately, I'd just have to list him as a sit. Now, John Mechie was amazing in that primetime game up against the Lions back in Week 10 as the wide receiver 8. And when push comes to shove, though, while I do like John Mechie and I'm always going to root for him, it's unlikely that he ever does that again with Nico Collins back, so he definitely should not be rostered. For the Jaguars, prior to the bye week, Brian Thomas Jr. was perfectly mid, right? He was the wide receiver 30 up against the Lions in Detroit with that dumb bastard Mac Jones under center. The Texans is a great matchup for wide receivers, and with T-Law seemingly back, I think BTJ could get back to his old ways. So I won't get too hyped, way too hyped here, shout out Cash Nasty, and bang the drum too heavily. I've got him kind of just as a low-end wide receiver 3, especially because, T-Law coming back, sure, he's way better than Mac Jones, but, T-Law hasn't been that great this season. Let's just be honest. So Parker Washington is an okay wide receiver 4 at the NFL level. And with that, how bad the Jaguars wide receiver core is due to injuries, he's the wide receiver 2 on this team. And even with Trevor Lawrence potentially back, there is not a single thing that I could think of that would lead me to actually telling you guys to play Parker Washington. Technically, there is one, and that would be if every other NFL wide receiver just couldn't play. In that case, I would play him. Devin Duvernay, nay, the Horseman. What a fucking nickname that is. The Horseman himself. The exact same thing I said about Parker Washington, you could say about him. Next up, we got the LA Rams at the Saints, the start of the 4 p.m. slate on Sunday, Eastern Standard Time. Even with the Rams getting stabbed up more times than Julius Caesar by the Eagles, Puka was the wide receiver 9. He had 9 catches on 13 targets for 117 yards, and he's now had 3 games straight inside the top 9, with the Saints allowing the 6th most points on a per-game basis to wide receivers. Puka's going to hit the Saints with the sweet chin music, Heartbreak Kid style, as a top 6 wide receiver. While I did just give Puka kind of the gawk 9,000 special there, Kupp has been almost as good. 4 straight inside the top 18 and 3 of the last 4 inside the top 12. Last week, he was 8 of 11 for 60 yards and a touchdown. Up against the Saints defense, I expect these two to form an Eiffel Tower over that defense and go to Pound Town, so I also got him inside of the top 8. I just have Puka ranked slightly higher. DeMarcus Robinson got arrested for drunk driving on Monday, going over 100 miles per hour near the Rams practice facilities. While it is the holiday season right now, and no one's gonna, necessarily take everything I say to be the most serious thing. And again, I'm not here to teach you guys fucking life lessons. We're just here to have fun. But please do not drive drunk. It's such a stupid thing to do. It just really is. You're putting yourself and other people in danger. I'm not here to lecture everyone, so I'm just going to mention that. Please don't do that. Again, Nick, I do whatever I want. I guess you technically can, but it is illegal, right? So don't do that. The report is that he's going to play this week. Even though he does have big upside, there's a chance I think McVay might punish him a little bit, not give him as many snaps. So I wouldn't feel comfortable playing him. MVS has put up back-to-back top 22 games. His target share on the Saints offense is not the highest, right? 3 and 4 targets over the last 2 weeks. But with him having 3 total touchdowns in those 2 games, if you wanted to YOLO and play him just due to the huge upside, sure. But in terms of for the sake of the video, he's knocking on the door of being a start. I just don't feel enough confidence in him. The rest of the wide receivers on the Saints are irrelevant. Not even going to waste your time yapping on about them. Next up, we got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Carolina Panthers. Now, Mike Evans in his debut up against the Giants in MetLife, despite the fact that the Buccaneers absolutely took them out back and whacked them like they were tending to some wabbits. You know, Mike Evans did not have a great showing. Wide receiver 29, 6 targets, 5 receptions, 68 yards, though he only played 60% of the snaps, and that's going to increase as the season goes along. I don't think we should be talking about him as a top 5 wide receiver just yet, but as a lower end wide receiver 1, he fits the mold up against a not so good Panthers defense. Now, Jalen McMillan returned last week as the wide receiver 82 up against the Giants. He had 2 targets. If they ramp him up and he actually learns how to catch the ball, you might be able to start him in the future, but as of right now, I'm not playing him. For Sterling Shepard, General Shepard was the wide receiver 54 last week with 5 receptions on 7 targets for 16 yards. If you wanted to start any non-Evans wide receiver on the Bucs, it would be Shepard, but luckily there isn't a rule in the league that makes you actually do that, and considering he has scored over 10 points just once this year, it can be no on playing him. For the Panthers, Xavier, somebody touch him, I get, was 4 of 6 for 56 yards against the Chiefs, with Bryce Young playing better. If one of these wide receivers can truly stand out, I will give them their flowers and tell you to start them. That's not the case right now. They've got Leggett, they've got Thielen, they got Moore, and there's just too much uncertainty here for me to actually try to make an educated call and tell you to play any of them. Now, if I was to play any of them, it actually would be David Moore, who was 6 of 10 for 81 yards and a score last week, but there's a very low chance he actually replicates that, even in a solid spot up against the Bucs. So all the Panthers are sits at the wide receiver position. Next up, we got the Philadelphia Eagles at the Baltimore Ravens. Now, A.J. Brown was a huge part of the domination of the Rams in primetime last week. 6 of 7 for 109 yards and a score as the wide receiver 6. Facing the Ravens in what might be the highest scoring game of the week, with A.J. Brown being a top 8 wide receiver in 4 of 8 games, I feel amazing about Brown going nuclear, popping off here as a great shot here to be the wide receiver 1 up against the defense that allows the most amount of points on a per game basis to the wide receiver position. Now, Devontae Smith was ruled out last week with a hammy injury and didn't practice at all last week, and I definitely do think it isn't a great indication towards him playing this week. Smith has struggled mightily over his last 2 games, being outside the top 50 in both. So if he does play, you got to play him due to the matchup, but he's more in that low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 range. And again, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I think he's actually going to play. If I'm being honest, let's just be honest. Let's just be real. I don't think he's going to play. Now, Jahan Dotson, even if Smith misses, Jahan Dotson just reeks more than a porta potty at like your local football tailgate, right? There's no need to even talk about him because no one even fucking has him. For the Eagles, we already went over them. For the other bird, the battle of the birds, we got Zay Flowers and the Ravens. Now, Quinyon Mitchell was not able to lock up the Rams wide receivers last week, so maybe there is a chink in his armor, but he's not fucking I was about to say Deion Sanders. Well, Deion Sanders, great corner. But I was going to say fucking Revis Island when Revis locked up all those guys. I think in like, what year was that? Like 2011? 2010? Something like that. You all know the graphic where he had like Chad Ochocinco looking like shit. All those like elite wide receivers. So ultimately though, Flowers isn't a wide receiver of amazing caliber to where like it's a lock that Quinyon Mitchell does shadow him. Flowers' upside is top 5 in any given matchup, and even with him not playing too well as of recently, with it being such a high-scoring matchup and broken coverage potentially occurring and Zay Flowers being butt-booty naked wide open, I could see him popping off here. The floor is the basement, shout out Ron Stewart, but he is a fine mid to low-end wide receiver 2. Rashad Master Bateman was the wide receiver 26 last week, 2 of 3 for 43 yards and a touchdown. He could definitely pull a rabbit out of the hat this week and score, but I just don't trust him, so I'm sitting him. Deontay Johnson hasn't done anything as a Raven. Nevermore. Just 1 catch in 4 games. Maybe he fucked Harbaugh's wife or something because he barely even sees the field. So if you're still holding on for dear life, trying to hold on to him, just cut him. Next up, we got the Sunday Night Football. Because you waited all day for Sunday night. The 49ers at the Bills. Now, honestly, I think the 49ers are potentially going to be waving the white towel and yelling uncle here. Even with Keon Coleman potentially back, Shakir should continue to get just fed the rock. Back-to-back games prior to the bye as a top 25 guy. And in this spot, I feel real nicey about Khalil Shakira as a high-end wide receiver 3. Now, Juwan Jennings, based on... we just went from one team to the other. We want to stay with the Bills. For the shoe, beat who are the Colts playing this week? I don't know what. It's late, guys. I didn't sleep a lot last night, so I do apologize. We'll be live tomorrow prior to the kickoff of Thanksgiving game. Sorry we didn't get as many videos this week. It is a holiday week. I'm busy. I apologize. Love you a long time, regardless, though. And I hope you love me. I hope you appreciate me. I'm just going to talk for a second. The comments recently have been so nice. I really do appreciate you guys so much. Like, it's just amazing. Like, it really is. I don't want to get too emotional on here, but it's truly crazy that, like, I started making these videos when I was 19. I'm now 25. Probably the only difference about me probably is I'm fatter now. Like, I'm a little bit more chubby back then. I had like I was a lot more skinny in the face. I kind of looked kind of weird because I was so skinny in the face. Like, I looked like the balloon, the balloon guy from Phineas and Ferb. If you've ever seen that, I kind of looked like that. It was kind of creepy. I wish I could be skinny again. Maybe that'll be the goal of the summer. Not have, if I move too much, my titties jiggle and might smack together and clap together. So I do appreciate you guys, though, genuinely. That was the point. I'm very thankful for you guys. And on Thanksgiving, it's important to be, as a kid, I always thought, oh, what are you thankful for? That's so fucking stupid. Fuck off, Mom. Not thankful for anything. But like, as a adult, there are things to be thankful for, and you guys are a big part of that. So I really do appreciate you guys. So thank you guys for everything. I really do love you guys. So again, we'll talk more about football. It's not about to be like a love affair here. I don't need to go suck you guys off through the fucking computer. If you want, I won't. So. Amari Cooper had 2 catches in his return He had 2 catches in his return up against the Chiefs, 55 yards. Now, for me, I kind of just want to see him ramped up more before I consider starting him. So, again, there's too many teams playing this week to really be like, wow, I want to start Amari Cooper. Now, Coleman has missed 2 straight games prior to the bye with the wrist. Look at the flick of that wrist. He returns, potentially. I would rank him above Cooper, but I would still prefer to sit him. For the 49ers, based on Brock Purdy not throwing at all in practice outside of 1 pass today on Wednesday, the odds that he actually suits up, in my opinion, is slim to none. Jennings was the wide receiver 43 last week, with Brock going 5 of 7 for 40 yards. If you have to start him, he is a desperation play, and you are assuming that Brandon Allen, who looked like a blind man, right, is going to actually do something. So I'm just not going to play him. Debo, back-to-back games outside the top 55, and without Brock Purdy, there's really nothing to make me believe that that's going to change. If I'm not starting Jennings or Debo, I'm definitely not playing Slick Rick, who is way lower down on the totem pole. Next up, we got the Browns at the Denver Broncos on Monday Night Football. Now, Bo Nix loves Cortland Sutton more than I love Taco Bell after slamming back 10 high noons on a Saturday night. Last week, he was the wide receiver 2 in Viva Las Vegas with 8 receptions on 10 targets for 97 yards and 2 touchdowns. In his last 4 games, he has been a top 6 wide receiver in 3. The Browns defense isn't the best, so I do feel confident in ranking Sutton as a top 12 wide receiver, but he's in that low-end wide receiver 1 range. Cedric Tillman is dealing with a concussion, and I feel as though he will probably end up missing for the Browns, if I'm being honest with you. And that will elevate Jeudy into a start-worthy range. Jeudy has been a top 26 wide receiver in 3 straight games. The Broncos matchup is tough, though, and if Surtain is on him, it could be a disaster. So he's kind of just a low-end wide receiver 3. Cedric Tillman is dealing with a concussion, like I said. Since there is extra time, I wouldn't say that he's like guaranteed to be out because it's a Thursday to a Monday. But he did struggle in 2 straight games. When healthy, I think he'll bounce back. He would be in the same range as Jeudy if he starts. Elijah Moore has big upside and has shown it off this season, but if the matchup was better, I would talk him up, but I just don't feel this one really is. The rest of the Broncos, we've got Devon Vale, who had elevated himself to become really the clear number 2 wide receiver on this offense. He scored 10 or more points in 3 straight games, and if you are looking for safety in deeper leagues, you can fire him up, but for most people, he's just going to be on the bench. Little Jordan Humphrey is fighting for the 3 role in this offense with Marvin Mimsy. I am not biting the bullet here and playing him. So thank you guys all so much for watching today's video again. I am incredibly thankful for each and every single one of you guys who watch my videos, whether you started watching today or you started watching all those years ago when I was 19 years old. I really do appreciate you. I love you guys more than you will ever know. Please make sure you guys do check out Underdog if you are new. It's feast week. Sign up using code Notorious to get your free pick plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Love you guys all more than you will ever know. Check out one of the videos on the screen if you haven't seen them already, and I'll be live tomorrow prior to kickoff of Thanksgiving on Thursday. Love you long time. Have a great one. As always, good boy.